Most everybody here knows the Golden Girls. Has anybody ever watched Grace and Frankie?
Yes.
Okay. It's on Netflix. It's really good. It's a good show. We have Ladies in Lavender. It's another movie. And Quartet is a movie. No. I didn't mean to go there yet. Well, anyway, what did you notice about most of the images in the magazine and all those images from the movies that I showed you?
They're all white.
Pardon me?
They're all white.
Exactly. And that is kind of where race and age and my work lands, is that you're now beginning to see, there was a time when you did not see that kind of representation of even older white women in media. You didn't, you really didn't see them, and they were playing stereotypical roles. They did someone's grandmother, you know, or the old wise lady. And I usually do this exercise when I didn't feel like lugging them, where I bring children's books and I divide you all in a group and I'll have you look at children's literature to see what old people look like in children's literature. They're usually witches or the grandma, or, you know, all the stereotypes. And those kind of stereotypes are what we call the decline narrative of aging. The decline narrative is that not all old people are depicted bent over, in decline, always having some kind of medical problem, etc. and so forth. Well, lately people begin to look at age from a cultural standpoint. So imagine if you are already at the margins of society, far as your gender, far as your race and age, when those three things start working together, it becomes really complicated. Now, for eldering black women, in my work, I argue that it's even more complicated, and I do a lot of work on eldering sexuality. I'm looking for eldering black women who are expressing their sexuality in films and literature. That's not the only thing I'm looking for, that's the main thing. It's more of a risk for black women. Now, I know you guys are reading some books, novels, etc. You guys, have you all talked about the controlling stereotypes of black women, the Jezebel, the mammy? Okay.
Not as it relates to race, no. Okay. Just the stages of womanhood so far.
Well, as it relates to race, there are, scholars have identified these controlling stereotypes. The Jezebel would be a black woman that's read as hypersexual.
Write that really down. Y'all better be taking notes now. You might want to repeat that, please, Miss Juanita.
Jezebel, hypersexual. Based off the character, for those of you who familiar with the Bible, Jezebel in the Old Testament. Hypersexual, using her sexuality to get what she wants, what she feels like she needs, or to control, really using her sexuality as a way to control things. Mammy would be, have you ever, anybody seen Gone with the Wind? Mm-hmm. There you go. Mammy.
I haven't.
Now, what's interesting is you have two extremes. Jezebel, hypersexual. Mammy, asexual. She don't even have any sexuality. She's just there to take care of the babies, take care of the household, those kinds of things. Then you have with someone people call the sapphire. She would be like we would call the angry black woman today. And I know some of you are reading Eloquent Rage.
Throw your hands up. Represent Eloquent Rage.
Okay.
All right. There you go.
So that would be basically, it was used for a woman's anger, a black woman's anger, which is anger is a normal human emotion, being used against her as a negative stereotype. Okay. And social media, I mean, when these things happen, they're basically, I call them institutional forms of othering. They other these women that they basically, dehumanizing them, meaning that things that are normal to being human, they get berated for expressing them. Now, when it comes to age, I really have been thinking about this lately. Preparing for this really made me think about this. In the age of the Me Too movement, I've really been thinking a lot about how many older women how the movement has caused them to reflect on things on situations that they had when they were younger, that they've been harassed, assaulted, and how they did not have any venue. And I'm just really been concerned and wondering if there is a space for them to not just share their stories, but to gather and find support from other women their age in order to share these kinds of things. Especially when I think about elderly Black women, because a lot of Black women were domestics. And being a domestic many times, especially if they didn't have the chance to be educated at maybe a historically Black college or a predominantly white institution, then they didn't have many choices of work available to them. So going into someone's home oftentimes made them vulnerable sexually, because in many cases, the man of the house would actually sexually harass and or assault or even rape them. And they had to choose between keeping food on the table and maintaining their job. And they knew that if they said anything, no one would believe them. And I just really been thinking about how the Me Too movement, if there's an avenue for them to really express and to reflect and to bring their trauma to the table. I think it should be an important opportunity for them to do that. Now, these pictures I have here, I have a Pinterest page. It's called Black Senescence. And senescence is the word that we use to mean growing older. Like you have pubescence, adolescence. Well, senescence is the word for growing older. And I had a hard time curating these images. I haven't been to the page in a long time. But it was really difficult for me to find a lot of images of elderly Black women. But why do you think is this more of my pages from my Pinterest page? And the little avatar up there is my oldest granddaughter. She's a lot older than that now. Why do you think it's difficult to find images of Black women in popular media?
Is that hard?
Pardon me?
I mean, because I guess they're just not there. They just haven't been taken.
Okay, that's one reason. What's another reason? Yes.
Elderly Black women are intersections of many different minorities, and so they're very underrepresented in media.
Okay, right. Okay, good. Some of you are reading Righteous Discontent, correct?
Represent Righteous Discontent. Raise your hands.
So you know about the issues of respectability.
They will.
Okay.
They ain't reading yet. Keep it real.
Well, that's okay. For many elderly Black women, they were raised during an era where they were told, not just from their families, they were sent messages from outside society that in order to be considered respectable, they had to behave and present themselves in a certain way. From their dress, to their hair, to their language, to how they conducted their business, their household. And so many Black women kept it's like a duality. It's like I had this public image and I had this private image. But now Black feminists are calling for women to practice what they call the politics of pleasure. And that sounds like not pleasure so much so in an erotic, sensual sense, but what pleases you. You have the right to live according to what pleases you. Basically, define your own joy. What's your joy? Define your own joy. However, if you weren't raised this way, even if you believe this and are coming into this particular contemporary moment, it's not going to be easy for you. It's this tension. It's this tension that exists. And so many eldering Black women don't want to expose themselves to maybe to taking on certain kinds of roles in the popular culture, in popular media, because unfortunately so, many times we Black women feel that the responsibility of how the entire race is read is on their shoulders. Whereas a lot of the dominant culture generally doesn't have that feeling. So right now we're in I call it a really interesting moment, because many elderly Black women are breaking out of these modes. And it's kind of an exciting time to be around. And another reason why we don't see a lot of the images is because we are not telling our own stories, meaning that the younger generation of Black women are telling our own stories. But as they get older, many of the early Black feminists, they are now getting older, and they are beginning to write and tell stories and kind of engage with their elder ring. Even some of the famous Black poets like Sonia Sanchez, Nikki Giovanni, so they're beginning to engage with the topics of them growing old, Alice Walker, in their writing and in their work. So I think that maybe in the next 5 to 10 years or so, we will begin to see more representation of elderly Black women in these kinds of roles.